Hello, I'm Steve Young and welcome to Basic Door Panel Servicing. This tape is designed to teach the beginning or trainee locksmith basic techniques for removing and replacing the door locks on a wide variety of cars. This usually requires the removal and replacement of the inner door panel and occasionally components such as power window controls, power seat controls, and automatic seatbelt mechanisms. You will see 6 different door panels in this tape: the 1990 Geo Prism, the 1990 Plymouth Laser, the 1989 Chrysler LeBaron, the 1990 Chevrolet Lumina, the 1990 Mercury Cougar, and the 1989 Cadillac Seville. On the first 5, you will see the complete disassembly and reassembly from start to finish. On the Cadillac Seville, you will see highlights of some unusual features found only on the more expensive General Motors cars. The information contained in this video cannot be absorbed in one viewing. As we go along, be prepared to pause or rewind your VCR until you have learned each technique. Pay particular attention to the close-up views. Learning to service different styles of door panels is vital to any automotive locksmith. Let's begin by taking a look at some special tools we'll be using in this tape.
These are clip removing tools. These tools are inserted between the door panel and the door to release the plastic clips which secure the panel onto the door. There are 2 basic types of these tools, ones that use a scissoring action and ones that use a prying action. The tool on the left uses a scissor action to release the clip from the door panel by squeezing the 2 handles. The tool on the right is also inserted between the panel and the door. Pushing the handle of the tool towards the door will pry upwards on the door panel, releasing the clip from the door. In order to better show you how the tool operates, we've inserted a connector into a door here without the door panel on top of it. The tool slides around the plastic connector and then you pry upwards against the clip and downwards against the door until the clip comes free of the door. As you can see, this takes quite a bit of pull. Brace your tool carefully so that you don't scratch the paint, and watch that it doesn't slip when the clip pops loose. This is a typical handle removing tool. This tool is required to remove a wide variety of different styles of window cranks and even a few door handles. To remove the handle, the tool is inserted between the door panel and the window crank. The opening of the tool goes around the central shaft of the window crank, and the 2 points at the center of the tool push the spring clip out of their socket in the handle, which allows the handle to be removed from the shaft. The tool must be removed from behind the handle before the crank can be removed from the shaft. Usually, the tool must be inserted from the handle side of the crank. Occasionally, however, you will find clips that have been put on from the opposite direction, and you will have to insert the tool from the back side of the handle. That completes the tool section. Now let's go on to one of the simplest door panels, the 1990 Geo Prism door panel. If there is any one thing that all door panels have in common, it's that the highest stress points have the largest screws. This means that the largest screws will usually be located on the armrest or on the grab handle, which is used to pull the door closed. Look for pieces of trim and other disguises to hide the heads of these large screws. Usually on most door panels you will find at least 2 large Phillips head screws. Sometimes the screws will be down inside the depression where your hand goes, inside the armrest. This door is typical of most Toyota style door panels. The Geo Prism is a joint venture between General Motors and Toyota. So you will see this type of door panel on most of the Toyotas, cars, and trucks. Once the screws have been released, grab the armrest and lift it carefully away from the door. The next step is to remove the inside door handle. This is held in place by one exposed Phillips head screw. Many times you will see a piece of trim used to disguise the head of the screw. Now gently grab the door handle and pull it towards the front of the car. There are 4 tabs which engage with the door itself, which hold the handle in place. The handle is held onto the handle linkage by one plastic clip. It's necessary to pry upwards on the edge of the clip to release the linkage from the door handle. The plastic clip wraps around the linkage rod, holding the rod against the handle assembly. Sometimes you will also see the inside lock control located in the same place. In that case, there would be two linkage rods to disconnect. Our next step is to remove the window crank. We'll use the handle removing tool that we showed earlier. It slides on underneath the handle, push in against the clip until you hear it snap, pull the tool off, and then pull the handle free from the door panel. Make sure that you do not lose the clip. Now we're going to locate our panel clips by feel. Pull away from the door on the door panel and watch for where it does not flex. Insert your tool over the clip, pry gently to release the clip from the door itself. Again, this is a very, very simple door panel. This is one of the easiest door panels you'll ever have to take apart. Simply unsnap each one of the clips and then lift the door panel up and away from the door itself. On most door panels, you will find a plastic moisture barrier between the door and the door panel. This is held in place by a bead of caulk. Moistening your fingers slightly will keep the caulk from sticking to you as you pull the plastic sheet away. Only pull enough of the plastic sheet down to give you enough room to reach the lock easily inside the door panel. Here we see the lock and the linkage inside the door. There is an access hole through the door so that you can reach a screwdriver straight into the back of the lock and release the linkage. Pry gently on the plastic clip to release it from the linkage. Pull the linkage loose. Then, using your other hand, push the lock towards the inside of the door panel. Reach and release the two edges of the spring clip which holds the lock in place. Once both of these have been released, the lock will slip inwards towards the inside of the door panel. Here we see the lock released from the door handle. This is the tab which locks in behind the spring clip and holds the lock into place. The beveled edge of the tab pushes the spring clip up and away as the lock is pressed back into its socket so that it locks back in automatically. To reinstall the lock, slide it back into its socket, place your screwdriver against the back of the lock and press until the snap ring engages with the two locating tabs. Now hook the linkage back up into the cam and then slide the plastic hook of the clip down, around, and over the linkage rod to hold it tightly in place. If there was any sort of cover over the access hole, slide that cover back into place and secure it back onto the door panel. Now we bring our moisture barrier back into place, stretching it to remove any wrinkles, and press the bead of caulk back in firmly against the plastic moisture barrier. Make sure that it fits back on exactly the way it came off. Now bring the door panel back into place, set it up over the edge of the door, making sure that the vertical button aligns in the hole through the top of the door panel. Slide it down onto the door itself, making sure that the clips interlock with the top of the door panel. Line up your plastic clips around the outside edge of the door panel and press in, making sure that they're all started into their holes. Then go around the edge with your fist and pop each clip individually until it clicks back into its socket. Now we grab the handle linkage with a pair of needle nose pliers, bring the handle in, and slip the connector over the end of the linkage. This will be a tight fit. Slide it on until you know that it is started properly, and then take a pair of needle nose pliers and gently squeeze the linkage onto the connector. Once the connector is all the way seated, bring a screwdriver in and snap the connector over the end of the linkage to hold it solidly in place. Now we slide the four tabs of the handle assembly into their sockets in the door panel, push in and towards the rear of the car until they click into place. And bring in the single Phillips head screw which holds the door handle assembly onto the door itself. Be careful as you tighten that screw because it is going into a plastic assembly and it would be easily stripped. The heavy screws in the armrest are captive. They won't fall out unless you take them out completely. Start each one of the screws into the door before you tighten either one of them. Remember, this is the highest stress point on the door panel assembly. This has to take all the force of the door being closed, so make sure that both of these screws are securely tightened. After the armrest is tight against the door panel, it's time to reinstall the trim strip which hides the screw heads. This trim strip has a clip on the rear end which slides underneath the armrest and 3 lugs which snap into holes in the face of the armrest. Gently press them into place. Do not force it. It will slide in easily once it's in the proper spot. Now we need to bring in the window crank. Place the plastic washer back over the window crank the same way that it came off. Slide the crank over the shaft until you hear the snap ring. Click into place. Test the operation, and the job is complete. The Prism is typical of most Toyota-style door panels. Now let's look at a more complicated Japanese-style door panel. This is on the 1990 Plymouth Laser. This car is also sold as the Mitsubishi Eclipse and the Eagle Talon. This door panel is quite a bit more complicated than the Prism panel. We have hidden screws and several other features that are common to many of the more advanced Japanese-style cars. This type of screw cover is typical. Simply pry underneath one edge of it with a screwdriver until the cap pops up, revealing the head of the screw. When you loosen the screw cover will usually come off with the screw. Sometimes it will have a tendency to stick to the door panel, but most of the time it will pull off like what you've seen here. And the second screw is removed just like the first. Go all the way around the outside edge of the door panel and make sure that you've located all of the screws. You will often find hidden screws buried in the carpet pile on the bottom edges of door panels. Feel around the edge until you locate a depression. Just insert the screwdriver into the hole and remove the screw. It is possible to get a strand of the carpet caught between your screwdriver and the screw and accidentally unravel the carpet, so always watch around the edge of the hole as you're tightening and loosening these screws. Here we see another type of concealed screw. This one has a square plug molded into the door panel itself. There will be a small opening on one side. Insert your screwdriver into that opening and carefully pry the plug out of its socket. Be careful with this. It's very easy to mar the door panel while you're doing this. Once the plug is removed, the screw head is revealed. As you remove the screws, be sure to keep track of which screw came from which hole. Many of the screws are not interchangeable on these door panels. As we said earlier, the largest screws will always be found around the armrest or the grab handle which is used to pull the door closed. Many times you will see a plastic plug like this that is just pressed into a hole. They can usually be removed without any tools at all. Whenever you have a screw that's recessed as far as this one is into the panel, it's a good idea to use a magnetic screwdriver to prevent the screw from accidentally falling inside the panel. As you loosen the screw, you'll feel the grab handle release itself from the door. Carefully remove the screw from the panel, making sure that if there are any lock washers on the screw that you don't lose them. Often you'll find it necessary to lie on your back underneath the door in order to be able to see the plastic clips which secure the door panel onto the door. As you remove the clips, make sure that your clip removing tool is directly on the clip itself and not on the door panel when you begin prying. If you pry against the door panel, you run a risk of cracking the panel. It's at this point that you'll discover whether or not you've found all of the hidden screws. If you come to a part of the door panel that just absolutely will not pull free from the door, stop and look around and see if there's not a hidden screw that you've overlooked. The plastic clip that you saw in the tool section at the beginning of the video was a very, very tight-fitting clip. Generally, clips will come loose much easier than that one. Door panels are designed to be serviced. As a general rule, if you're having to force anything, then you're doing something wrong. Before we can remove the door panel, we'll have to remove this triangular piece of trim at the forward edge of the door, which covers the rearview mirror mechanism. It's held on with 2 plastic clips and will pull off fairly easily with your fingers. You need to pull towards the rear of the car door. Now that we've removed all of the screws and released all of the clips, it's time to lift the panel off of the door. The top of the door panel is almost always a hook which hooks over the top of the door at the base of the window. Pushing in and lifting up will release the panel from the door, allowing you to lift it away. Before you can remove the door panel from the door completely, you'll have to disconnect the wires leading to the power window control. There will always be some sort of catch on the plug that either has to be pushed in or lifted up in order to remove the plug. Never force one of these. Now that the door panel is out of the way, we need to peel back the moisture barrier the same as we did on the Prism in order to gain access to the lock. If for any reason you have to close the door to the car while you have the door panel off, make sure that the caulk on the inside edge of the moisture barrier doesn't touch the seats or the carpets. It's very sticky and will make a big mess. This door lock is held in much the same fashion as the Prism door lock was, but on this one we need to remove the cam in order for the lock to clear the window track. Carefully remove the retainer clip and then pull the cam off of the back of the lock. It's not necessary to remove the linkage. Now that the cam is free of the lock, we need to carefully pry the spring retainer away from the lock housing in order to release the lock. After one end of the spring clip has been removed from its slot, hold it out of the way with your finger while you pull gently towards the inside of the door on the lock itself. When the other end of the spring clip is released, the lock will snap inwards towards the inside of the door. Continue to pull on the lock until it is completely free of the lock housing, and then remove. And here's the lock out of the car, and you can see the two retaining tabs which hold the lock into the lock housing. Notice also that the code number is stamped on the side of the lock. Replacing the lock in the housing is just a matter of bringing it back into place, aligning the locking tabs with their slots in the housing, and then pushing the lock into the housing until the retainer spring snaps over the locking lugs on the sides of the lock. Next, we need to replace the cam onto the post at the back of the lock. Slide it back into place and then bring in the snap ring. This is one of those jobs where it's nice to have a magnetic probe around in case you drop the snap ring. Position the snap ring, making sure that both legs of the ring engage with the slot on the back of the lock. Now bring in your screwdriver and carefully push downward on the snap ring until it engages firmly over the back of the lock. Always test the operation of the lock with the key before you put the door panel back together. Here is a view of the access hole that we've been working through. This is just underneath the moisture barrier, and you can see that you can reach straight into the lock with your screwdriver through this hole. After we're sure that everything is reconnected properly inside the door, we bring the moisture barrier back into place, sticking the caulk back down to itself, making sure that we have a tight seal all the way around the edge of the moisture barrier. When the plastic is in place, go around the edge of the seam, pushing the caulk down, making sure that you get a tight seal around the edge of the plastic. Reconnect your power window connection, making sure that the plug snaps solidly into place, and then lift the top of the door panel back onto the door, making sure that the hook on the top of the panel engages with the door itself. Once the top of the door panel is properly engaged with the top of the door, go all the way around the outside edge of the panel, making sure that each of the plastic connectors has started into their correct holes. Then go around the edge, snapping each one of the connectors back into place. Now that the door panel is attached to the door, we bring in each one of our screws one at a time and start them into their holes. Remember to keep the screw cover with the screw, and once the screw is tightened down, snap the head of the screw cover back into place over top of the screw head. Using the magnetic screwdriver again, we start the screw in through the hole in the grab handle and tighten it securely to hold the center of the door panel against the door. Continue on around the panel, replacing the screws one at a time, making sure that each screw goes back into the same hole that it came out of. As you replace any screws that go through carpeting, make sure that you don't pull any of the carpet fabric as you tighten the screw down. Once the screw has been tightened, take your fingers and rough up the nap of the carpet to conceal the head of the screw again. Now that the screws have been replaced in the panel, we need to bring in our concealing plugs and snap them back into the panel. Make sure that you snap them back in the same direction that they came out. Do not force these. When they're in the proper position, they'll just snap right back into place. Bring the cover over the rearview mirror mechanism back into place and snap it down, and the job is complete. Now that we've seen a couple of Japanese style door panels, let's look at some of the domestic door panels. This one is a 1989 Chrysler LeBaron door panel and is typical of almost all Chrysler products. On this door panel we have quite a few hidden screws, most of which are hidden inside the carpeting along the bottom edge of the door. You'll just have to locate these by feel. Simply run your fingers along the carpet until you feel a depression and insert your screwdriver and remove the screw. Remember, as you remove these screws, to watch out for the strands of the carpet becoming tangled around the screw or in the screwdriver, because you can unravel the carpet. And here we remove our third and final hidden screw. This one is the last one under the carpet. We can feel no more depressions. Now we need to remove the speaker grille from the door panel. This one simply snaps into place. Reach around the edge with your fingers and carefully pry it loose from the door panel. And here's the underside of the speaker grille. You can see the three connectors which snap into the door panel. With the speaker grille out of the way, we can easily see the screw which was concealed behind it. All we have to do is remove it. We've now removed all of the screws that we've been able to locate. By pulling out on the door panel, we'll be able to see where it's still firmly attached to the door. There must be another screw hidden behind this panel. Prying upwards gently with our fingertips on the bottom of the panel will release it from the door. Pull out on it carefully. The rearview mirror control goes behind the panel at this point. This is a mechanical linkage. These are cables. These are never disconnected. Pull out gently until you have enough room to work around the panel, and now you can look for your hidden screw. Our screw is located about where we would have expected it, right next to the handle that's used to pull the door closed. This is a large screw and it will be very tight. On door panels that have a lot of screws in them, there will be few and sometimes no plastic connectors holding the panel against the door. Pull out on the panel and release the hook along the base of the window from the door, and then we'll lift the door panel up and off of the door itself, being careful to guide the panel with the rearview mirror control through the opening in the door panel. Before we can remove the panel completely, though, we need to disconnect the wiring which goes to the courtesy light located at the back edge of the door panel. This is a typical Chrysler connector. Lift up on the tab with your screwdriver and separate the two parts of the plug. We have a similar connector on the front part of the door panel that goes to the speaker. This one is covered with foam tape. You'll have to carefully peel the foam tape off from around the connector in order to expose it so that you can disconnect it. Once the catch is exposed, we insert a screwdriver and carefully pry the two parts of the speaker wire apart. And now we can remove the door panel from the car. On many of the Chrysler products, you'll find a layer of foam sound insulation between the moisture barrier and the door panel. This is held in place by a plastic clip which you can remove with your standard clip removing tool. Once the clip has been removed, it's just a matter of peeling the foam away from the door and guiding the wires through the holes. Peel the foam insulation back, and then we're ready to remove the moisture barrier. This is held in place by a clear contact cement on the Chrysler models. This is much easier to deal with. Just peel back the plastic until you have enough room to reach inside and release the lock.
Inside the door panel, we can see the standard Chrysler modular handle and lock assembly, which is all held in place by this one nut in the center. Removing the nut is the first step in removing the entire handle and lock assembly. The next step is to remove the bracket which holds the handle assembly against the outer skin of the door. Next, we need to disconnect the lock linkage from the back of the cam right here, and then move down to the base of the handle linkage and disconnect that from the latch right here. Both of these linkage rods can be disconnected with nothing but your fingers. All you have to do is pull the linkage rod loose from the plastic connector. After the linkages have been disconnected, lift up and then push down on the handle assembly to release it from the outer skin of the door. When all of the parts of the handle have come free of the door, all you'll have to do is lift up on the handle and pull the linkage straight up and out of the door. The lock cylinder is held into the handle assembly by two Phillips head screws. Once these have been released, there is a U-shaped retainer which goes around the face of the lock and presses the lock against the front of the handle assembly. After you've released the two screws, just pull up on the retainer assembly or on the lock itself, and the entire unit will slide free of the handle. Here you see the retainer, and then all we have to do is lift the lock cylinder free of the handle. Replacing the lock cylinder is the reverse of the removal. Put the retainer ring around the lock and slide it down into the handle, making sure that the two tabs on the retainer align over top of your screw holes. Then it's just a matter of putting in your screws and tightening them evenly. To reinstall the handle assembly in the door, first slide the linkage rods inside the door and then tuck the top portion of the handle assembly underneath the outer skin of the door. Push the bottom of it home until it seats. After the linkages have been reconnected, bring in the retainer bracket and the nut that holds it in place. Tighten the nut down to secure the handle into the door. After everything is tightened down and you've checked the operation of all the linkages, bring the moisture barrier back up and carefully run your fingers along the edge and make sure that it seats properly against the door to form a tight seal all the way around. Once you've brought your foam insulation back into place, threaded the wires through it, plug the plastic connector into place, and we're ready to reinstall the door panel now. Begin by reconnecting your courtesy light connectors, making sure that the plug is solidly snapped together and won't slide apart. Then do the same for your speaker connection. Slip the two pieces together until they snap, and then wrap the foam tape around the speaker connection the way it was when you started. This foam tape is on the connection to keep it from rattling inside the door panel. Now slide the control panel through the opening in the outer door panel and make sure that you do not kink your cables leading to the rearview mirror. Once the panel is through the opening, then all we need to do is lift the panel up and hook the top of it over the hook at the base of the window. When you're sure that the panel is in the right position, snap it over the hooks at the top of the door and make sure that it seats. Go around the edge, pushing it down and making sure that your alignment is proper with your screw holes. It's not unusual to find extra cables inside the doors for options that the car does not have. Cars routinely come wired for all the options possible, and only the ones that are installed are actually connected. Reinstall your screws in the door panel, making sure that they are all tightened securely, especially the one that's close to the handle that's used to pull the door closed. Then bring your control panel back into place, work the cables for the rearview mirror control down inside the panel, make sure that your alignment pins align with the edges of the door panel, and when it's in the proper position, just go around the edge and snap it into place. Reinstall the screw underneath the speaker grille and then go down the carpeted portions of the door panel and find each one of your screws and retighten them. On this door panel, the screws remained in the panel while we had it apart.
After all of the screws have been replaced in the door and securely tightened down, then snap the speaker grille back into place and the job will be complete. Now let's look at another domestic car. This is a 1990 Chevrolet Lumina. This door panel is typical of most of the new General Motors cars. Since this particular car is not equipped with power windows, the first thing we need to do is remove the window crank. We'll use our standard crank removal tool, slide it in from the handle side, release the snap clip, and pull the handle free from the door. Notice that the clip has almost come out of its slot. Be very careful with these things. They're very easily lost. It's a good idea to keep a few extra clips in your toolbox. Next, we'll remove the screw which is located behind the inside door handle. This is a common location for a screw like this on most General Motors cars. Now we need to remove the plastic trim around the inside door handle. This just pulls free from the panel itself. It has 3 plug-in fittings molded into the bottom side of the strip, which plug into sockets located in the door panel. There are the 3 clips, and there are the 3 slots that they plug into. The plastic cup around the handle itself just pulls over the end of the handle. It has a little flap on the end to allow it to pull free. Next, we need to remove the 2 large screws located inside the grip area of the armrest. As we said before, this is where you will always find the largest screws. This is the highest stress point. This is a very common location for these screws on General Motors cars. There are 2 more obvious screws located on the back edge of the door panel. These are right at the very edge of the panel itself. They're short, self-threading sheet metal screws with a small rubber cup around the head of the screw. Don't lose the cup when you pull the screw loose from the door panel. The last screw is also in plain sight. This is at the forward edge of the door pocket. This one also has a small black cup around the head of the screw. The lower portion of the door panel is a separate piece on these cars. This is common on cars that have motorized seat belts inside the door. We're using a piece of cardboard to cushion our clip removing tool against the door itself to keep from scratching the paint. This is because the clips are located so far inside the door panel that we're having a hard time reaching them. The scissors type clip pullers would absolutely not reach these clips. As we work our way around the door, we release each one of the clips independently, making sure that our tool is over top of the clip, if necessary, locating the clip by feel. When the last clip has been released, we pull the entire lower section of the door panel off and away from the door. You can see the large white plastic clips that we were pulling free from the door. We continue to work our way around the upper portion of the door panel now, freeing each one of the clips individually as we come to it. The last clip is located up high at the forward edge of the door panel in the part of the panel that covers the rearview mirror mechanism. After that one has been released, we pull the panel loose from the door and we need to thread the upper portion of the seat belt through a slot in the back portion of the door panel, which is exposed after we remove the little plug. Once the upper portion of the seat belt is free of the panel, we can lift it up and carry it away. There is a small bracket located at the upper edge of the door which holds the seat belt against the door. There is a single screw which holds this bracket in place. Release the screw and then we'll pull the bracket off, releasing the seat belt. The bracket is removed by pushing it towards the rear of the door and sliding it out from around the seat belt. Before we remove the seat belt motor, we first need to disconnect the wires. This is a plug-in fitting. Reach your screwdriver behind the plug, release the clip, and pull the plug free. There you can see where the retainer clip fits. There is a second wire with the same type of connector located at the bottom edge of the seat belt assembly. Unplug it, and then we're ready to release the seat belt. There are 2 14mm bolts which hold the lower portion of the seat belt assembly onto the door. There is one bolt located on either side of the mechanism. When the second bolt has been removed, the seatbelt mechanism will hang freely from the top of the door panel. Remove the screw, pull the motorized section away from the panel, and just allow it to hang to one side. There is one more 14mm bolt located on the underside of the upper seatbelt mechanism. There is a tab located on the underside of this reel, and you must pull the reel down before it will release from the door panel. Now we need to remove the mounting bracket, which is bolted across the opening in the door panel. We have to remove this in order to be able to peel the moisture barrier back. This panel is what the two large screws in the armrest were attached to. When the last of the three screws has been removed, the bracket will come straight off of the door. Now we can begin peeling the moisture barrier back from the door. This is very much like the moisture barrier we saw on the Chrysler LeBaron. Is held on with clear contact cement. When we have the moisture barrier peeled down far enough, we can reach inside the door and release the door lock. Here's the inside of the door and the operation of the door lock. The door lock itself can be removed by releasing this flat steel spring clip from around the lock. This will not be easy. You'll need to clamp a pair of locking pliers onto this tab and gently work it back. There are two teeth which dig into the lock as you remove it. It will slide back on much easier than it comes off. Replace the moisture barrier just as we did on the earlier cars. Lift it up, stretch it into position, and then press it down in order to reseal the contact cement around the edges. After the moisture barrier has been reattached, we then install the mounting bracket back over the opening in the door. Don't tighten any of the screws until you have all three of them started. The upper reel of the seatbelt mechanism is the next thing to be installed. Place the locating tab into its socket and place the other end of it over the stud on the door. Bring in one of the 14mm nuts and securely tighten it. Now we need to replace the lower reel of the seatbelt mechanism back over its mounting posts. Take the two 14mm nuts and securely tighten them. After both of the nuts have been tightened, we need to reconnect the electrical wires to the motors. The shorter one plugs into the upper unit with a positive click. Then the longer wire plugs in at the base of the lower unit. Make sure that both connectors seat solidly in their sockets. Don't forget to replace the small clip around the upper edge of the seatbelt mechanism. This snaps over the seatbelt into its slot, and then the hole on the forward end of it goes over a post, and you tighten down the single nut which secures it in place. Now at last we're ready to replace the upper portion of the door panel itself. Thread the rear end of it between the two runs of the seat belt and tuck the upper portion of the seat belt into its proper slot in the door panel. As soon as the seat belt is in place, be sure to replace the small plastic tab which covers the slot. Once the plastic tab is seated, carefully lift the top edge of the door panel over the base of the window and snap it down into place. Then go around the edges of it, aligning each one of your plastic connectors with their proper holes. When all of the connectors are aligned with their holes, then go around the edge and seat each one of them individually. Now it's time to bring in the lower portion of the door panel. Thread it over the seat belt, bring it up into position, and align each one of the plastic tabs just as you did on the upper part of the door panel. After you've seated each one of the plastic connectors, double check and make sure that the seat belt is free to move through its slot. Now that the panel is back in place, go around the edges and replace all of the screws, making sure that you put each screw back in the same hole that it came out of. After you've replaced all the screws around the outside edges, it's time to replace the two screws that go down inside the grab handle of the armrest. Next, bring in the plastic cup that goes around the inside door handle, lift the handle up slightly, and slide the cup into place. Before you replace the upper trim panel, make sure that the linkage rod going to the inside lock control aligns properly with the slider in the panel. Bring the trim panel back into place with its rear edge against the panel first. Bring the slider down over top of the linkage rod and then press carefully above the 3 plastic fittings to push the trim panel back into its proper position on the door. After the trim strip is back in its proper position, bring in the last screw, which secures the cup around the inside door handle. And finally, we're ready to snap the window crank back over its post, make sure that it is properly seated, and the job is complete. Now, let's take a look at an unusual door panel which is found on the 1989 and up Mercury Cougars and Ford Thunderbirds. On most of the modern Ford products, it's not necessary to remove the door panel in order to remove the door lock. You will find a clip like this one next to the door lock on the rear edge of the door panel. Prying towards the inside of the car on the clip and pulling it out will release the lock from the door. Once the clip has been removed from the door, the lock cylinder will slide straight out of the door, pulling the linkage behind it. Disconnect the linkage and make sure that it doesn't fall inside the door panel, or you may have to pull the door panel in order to retrieve it. Reinstalling the lock is the reverse of the removal. First, reconnect the linkage or the cam, whichever you've disconnected. This is one of the new wafer tumbler locks, and we've disconnected the cam. Then set the lock back into a hole, making sure that it's properly into the door. Now replace the clip. Clip just slide it's all that had to remove lock on most of the modern doors. If the linkage is connected, it will still need to get rid of, then the door will usually be removed. However, the 1989 Ford Thunderbird door panel do not have any plastic clip on at all. To assemble one, all the screws using. If the door doesn't have windows, you'll need to remove. If it does have windows, then you need to remove the control. The door lock controls are easily removed from the control panel. Held back two soft screws. On these screws and move these switches and lift off the control. So you have at least one large case moves around and remove. As I said earlier, there are no plastic side in the door panel. Instead, you have plastic hooks molded on the inside of the door panel with lines on the door. From their sockets in the inner skin of the door. When all the hooks have been released, the panel lift and off the door. The door lock and the controls through the panel. This is a connected to the lock. So I pull the shield up and press the control and press it in order to remove the panel. Here are hooks that hold the door onto the top. On all the at 80 as well as and here are the smush barrier that hooks go into in order to fit into the door itself. And here's barrier go through and then wedges onto when the door panel is pushed down. Plastic on the Chrysler and the General Motors products. It's still held in place with contacts. This is white plastic. After you've the hole, slide the panel over the entire hole and on each one of the hole in the door. Then align it, push down on the panel, and the panel will be seated. Reinstall all of the screws, making sure that you securely tighten the main screw by the armrest, and then we're ready to install the to the panel, slide it back into place. Next, let's take a brief look at some of the unusual features found on the Cadillac Seville door panel. This is a common grab handle used on a lot of different General Motors cars. The screws are sealed under plastic cap and handle. Carefully pry the plastic cap off the magnet and then you can remove the screws. Remember, on almost all door panels you will have large screws associated with the armrest, so always look for screws in these locations. Here's a type of concealed screw that you'll find on a lot of the more expensive General Motors cars. This cap will either be plastic or metal, and you'll have to pry very carefully around the edges with your pocket knife in order to remove it. You have to remove the cap before you can reach the screw head. You will find control panels like in the more expensive General Motors cars. To release them, pry gently upwards on the forward end to release the spring cage. Then slides out from underneath the armrest. You will find a panel identical to this in the Buick Reatta. The power window switch is held in much the same fashion as the earlier control panel was, except on this one you'll have to pry up on it from the rear end. Once the switch is free of the armrest, it's a connection that's common on a lot of General Motors cars. There is a post through the back side of the connector which is attached to the switch. On top of that post is this blue knob. It's sort of a self-tapping nut. Most of the time you can just unscrew it. Occasionally you'll have to pry from underneath in order to release it, then twist and pull to release the blue knob. Once the knob has been removed, the connector will slide up and over the post to release. To replace it, just slide the blue knob back over the post. On all of the panels that we've seen so far, the inner weather stripping around the base of the window was connected to the door panel. When the panel came off, the weather stripping came with it. This is not the case on the Cadillac Seville. This metal strip holds the weather stripping against the window, and the door panel plugs into the slot along the upper edge of this metal strip. It's necessary to remove the strip before you can free up the moisture barrier to reach inside the door. You will find a strip just like this on the Buick Reatta also. After the metal strip has been removed, the weather stripping can then be lifted up and off of the door completely. This will free up the moisture barrier so that you can peel it back. All of the linkage rods and the power door lock mechanism are contained inside of this shroud. The plastic inner portion snaps onto the metal outer portion. You will find a shroud assembly like this on the Beretta, the Corsica, the Lumina, the Grand Prix, the Buick Regal, and the Cadillac Seville and the Buick Reatta, as well as many other cars. This is what makes these cars so hard to unlock from the outside. Releasing the clip which holds the lock on can be quite a job on these cars because it's so tight. Fortunately, they provide an access hole that you can reach a large screwdriver through to help pry the clip off. We have a small pair of locking pliers clamped onto the tab of the clip. We have it released now, and we pull the clip out of the door. This connector contains a small light bulb which illuminates the end of a fiber optic cable which is connected to the face cap of the lock. Whenever the courtesy light is on, this lights up and illuminates the keyhole of the lock. The fiber optic cable just unplugs from the connector. When you remove the lock from the door, you'll have to disconnect the fiber optic cable from the connector and carefully guide it through the door as you pull the lock free. This is a very long cable. You need to remember how it was routed. If necessary, draw yourself a diagram before you pull the cable free of the door. You'll find this feature on many of the more expensive General Motors cars. Here you can see both ends of the fiber optic cable, the end that plugs into the connector and the end that runs underneath the face cap on the front of the lock. Replacing the lock is the reverse of the removal. Be very careful that you reroute the fiber optic cable exactly the same way as it came out. Make sure that none of the cable can get caught in the window raising and lowering mechanism. When you reinstall this type of door panel, make sure that the top edge fits securely into its slot in the metal strip that secures the weather stripping. You'll find this type of door panel on the Cadillac Seville and the Buick Reatta. Here we have the back side of the inside lock control slider. This is very similar to what we had on the Lumina, except this one goes vertically. This is the linkage that the slider connects to.
You can see the bell crank there, which converts the motion from horizontal to vertical. You'll find this type of connector on most of the Cadillacs and the Oldsmobiles. Make sure that the linkage aligns properly with the slider when you place the slider back into its socket in the door panel. Replacing the plastic caps over the ends of the grab handle will complete our brief look at one of the most complicated door panels on the road today, the Cadillac Seville door panel. That completes basic door panel servicing. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video as much as I enjoyed making it. If you would like a listing of other TechTrain videos and products, or if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please write to us at the following address: TechTrain, Post Office Box 15401, Pensacola, Florida 32514. Our toll-free order line is 1-800-356-0136. And thank you once again for choosing TechTrain.